You do.
You mentioned the apparitions. Pope Leo saw the apparitions, and he said there would be a future pope who would have to be there and sort of look after them. Which pope would that be?
Pope Leo, the vision of Pope Leo.
He said it was for the future.
No, I think it was fairly general. It said, blah, 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 blah. Where are we? All this will begin during the papacy of one of the next popes, and Russia will be the cause. That's all it says. It refers to. I think it's taken obviously as a prophecy of the the outbreak of communism in 1917. Who was the Pope in 1917? Anybody answer that quickly? Benedict XV. Thank you.
Well done.
It's not saying that the Pope had to do anything particular. It's just saying it's not going to take place during your papacy, but during a later one. That's all. Yes.
And it didn't happen.
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? When we look at Fatima, which we'll do either next week or at the beginning of the following week, you know, and we look at the the so-called third secret, the picture of the hill with people climbing it and the man in white being knocked down and killed. Did it happen? Yes, it did happen in the sense that someone tried to kill Pope John Paul II. That's how. When you get visions like this, just to anticipate some of what we'll say next week, the Church doesn't have this picture of God as somehow decreeing, well, that's what's going to happen, whatever happens. God gives a warning or a picture. I mean, consider some of the pictures of the Old Testament, you know, some of the famous images, the ones again that we read at Christmas and Easter. A virgin shall conceive and give birth, and before he is of a certain age and can eat bread and honey, this will happen. Now, the pictures are not necessarily very specific. God gives pictures and warnings in order that we should change our ways. It's not saying this will inevitably happen, whether you like it or not. Our Lady at Fatima frequently said, you know, this is what is going to happen, but if you say the Rosary, or whatever her message might be, but at Fatima it's very much, if you say the Rosary, it can be mitigated or it can be avoided. So God doesn't sort of say, you know, the world's going to end in 6 days' time. He sort of says this is the sort of thing. So the picture of the demons coming out is obviously a picture of Satan being let loose on the world and deceiving many people, leading many people into error and rebellion. How the pictures are given to us in order that we take them on board and react to them and react in the appropriate way by prayer and penance and the sort of disciplines we undergo during Lent. So, did it happen? Yes, but insofar as you know, the Archbishop Cardinal Nichols recently, just a few days ago, didn't he, reconsecrated England and Wales to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This is the sort of thing that Our Lady has asked for. And I'm sure many graces will flow from that, and some of the sort of disasters that may have been prophesied can be averted. Am I okay standing up? You can see me. You want me to sit down?
No.
No.
So how many apparitions are happening all over the world? Because obviously we know about the sort of ones that everybody knows about, but I think there are quite a lot, aren't there?
Yes, quite a lot of people claim to be having apparitions. Yes, someone was telling me recently they were at a meeting in Dublin, I think, and some sort of congress. I think it was a Divine Mercy Congress, and there were about sort of 4 or 5 different supposed visionaries there. But of course, these are not visions that the Church has approved. And visions are of different levels. You know, some of them are intended for the person only. Mother Teresa's locutions or visions were not things that she was supposed to say to the whole world. They were for her. They had an effect on other people insofar as she obeyed them and found it in order. But I suppose what I was trying to do in the first part, in asking you to reflect on the sort of experiences we sometimes have of sensing God speaking to us, or sort of experiences people have at charismatic meetings, there's a kind of a continuum, if you like. At one end of the continuum, the most dramatic end is St. Bernadette or the Visionaries of Fatima actually seeing with bodily eyes Our Lady, if they are to be believed. The Church says we can believe it. Actually seeing as if she's physically there, Our Lady. At another extreme is people praying and sensing God speaking to them, saying, you know, do this or don't do that or do it this way. Something that really any of us might have. In between those two extremes are a whole range of experiences. Someone having a dream which appears to be a message from God. Someone like Don Bosco having a very powerful vision which he acts on, which appears to be... Don Bosco never sort of said to the bishop, you know, this is the vision I've had, can you tell me if it's true or not? He just sort of acted on it, and it came true. So that there's a kind of progression, as it were, from the lowest level to the sort of the highest one, the most significant one, and in between all sorts of different experiences that may be accessible to anyone, and some to more... Usually if people have a direct experience of God, it's not primarily for themselves. God works in such a, what we might call the economy of God, is that he works through individual people to affect others. We saw that with Moses, you know, he addresses Moses, not in order to give Moses, you know, some sort of, not so that Moses could go home and say to his wife, oh, I've had a very interesting experience today, I saw a burning bush and someone spoke, isn't that interesting, let's have a cup of tea. It's not primarily for his own sort of personal pleasure, it's in order that he do something that's going to affect many other people. Same with Mother Teresa. If God, you know, if God acts in what one might call an unusual way, it's he addresses one person, but that person then has a mission which affects other people. Similarly, you know, if God speaks to me, I can believe that he's doing it because he wants me to, you know, be a better priest or to do certain things in a way that's going to help other people. It's not just for myself, usually. Though there are visions which, well, one could say that St. Paul, when some of the visions he had, you know, he says on one occasion the Lord appeared to Paul and strengthened him in a vision, said, don't be dismayed, I have many people in this city who are on my side. Now, in a sense, that was for St. Paul's own personal comfort and strength. But let's not forget, he had a very, very unique role in the spreading of the gospel. So God, that phrase in the prophecy of Isaiah, where God says, you know, the word, was it today's, might even have been today's reading at Mass, the words that I speak are like the rain and that comes down from heaven. My word does not return empty. God speaks for a purpose, and his purpose is always achieved, provided we respond to it. Yes?
These apparitions started in May 13th, went through to October 13th, 6 months, and it was written like almost like by an academic, you know, the fine detail about Russia. What I can't understand is this child was a primary school peasant farmer's child. It was written so beautifully. Like how would she impart that to somebody in such beautiful text?
This is it. I mean, this is a great paradox that let me tell you a joke. I was at a dinner once with some very rather posh people in the oratory on St. Philip Neri's day, and there was someone there who there were two people at my table. One was a sort of rather posh guy from Central Europe who liked making witty comments, and next to us was a lawyer who was just telling us that he had studied at Balliol College, Oxford, and the other gentleman, who I won't name, is now deceased, with a completely straight face, turned to both of them and said, you know, I can't work out, John, whatever his name, John, you know, why has Our Lady not never appeared at Balliol College, Oxford? It's very strange. Why do you think this is? We looked at it, said, what on earth are you talking about? And he said, well, why should she? And very proud of himself. And he said, well, because she always makes a habit of appearing to the most stupid people. You know, there is a certain sense in which Our Lady appears to choose simple people, yeah, people who weren't Bernadette, illiterate peasant.
Do you think when she was giving the information to whoever, it was sort of almost given a nod through her?
Given
It was articulated so well by her, it was almost driven by her.
this is a very difficult thing. We'll look at it particularly when we come. I don't want to say too much about Fatima at the moment because I want to look at each apparition. If we look at La Salette, Our Lady, if I remember correctly, only appeared once at La Salette. Maybe if there are any experts on La Salette here, you may correct me. And there appears possibly to have been some distortion of the message. It's not entirely clear what the message is. You see, sometimes we have this idea that a message is given, you know, here, almost like you write it down. Well, of course, A, they didn't have time to write it down. B, they couldn't write. So they're reliant on their memories. The disadvantage, I don't want to criticize Our Lady at all because she knows what she's doing, of course, far more than we do. But the disadvantage of appearing to illiterate people is that they may distort or forget or not be entirely clear as to what the message was afterwards. Or at the very least, put it this way, the message is to some extent filtered through the mentality of the visionary. And as the message gets repeated, you know, certain human elements can creep in, which may explain why some of the messages, particularly La Salette, were not very well received at first. And sometimes Our Lady, it appears, didn't actually speak so much as show, I mean she did speak at times, but sometimes she didn't so much speak as show people a picture. To say, well, look at that, and you know, to some extent it's up to the visionary then to say what the picture said. So once again, this business, there are all sorts of different ways in which apparitions and visions take place. And we have to try and, this is why the bishop, when he investigates it, tries to be very crystal clear. What exactly, did she say this, or did you interpret that, or did she show you this picture? What did you think the picture meant? And it's not always clear what, and of course sometimes these poor visionaries were subjected to real harassment by people. Have you ever seen that lovely film, The Song of Bernadette? You know, you can see the way the poor girl is, she's a very, very uneducated, very simple girl, is treated very harshly by people who really don't want to believe at all what's going on. But of course, in Lourdes, of course, is one of the supreme examples of what you're saying, because the crowning, Our Lady said very little to Bernadette, really, but what she did say in the end was, when Bernadette said, "Who are you?" she said, "I am the Immaculate Conception," which Bernadette would have been way beyond Bernadette's understanding. And it was around about the time when the Immaculate Conception was solemnly defined as a doctrine. And of course, she spoke in Basque dialect, or whatever the dialect was, which was
I thought the basic thing about these apparitions, the message was prayer and penance. And therefore, it's how we...
Where? So you mean in general, or in...
Yes, most of them. And,
Hmm.
and that's why she appears mostly to the simple. Because she knows the church, she knows what they'll have to go through.
Hmm.
And it's to help them to develop where they are, because she usually goes to the poor or the poorest.
Hmm.
And encourage people to come in pilgrimage, which will help them as well as the people.
That's true, yes.
We help each other.
Yes.
And, you know, and the saying that, and therefore with prayer and penance, which is our Christian message of how we try to live, even in the phase of growing older, or we're just growing up, whatever, that basically is a message, or how we interpret it. Just like, and I came in late, but I had said a bit about Lourdes, you know, the sick. We have made it more that way. I mean, Lourdes, I'm very much familiar with as well. And if you're the sick
Mm.
Fatima, I've always heard that Fatima was about spiritual healing. And
Yeah, I mean, I will look at the different messages. I think in general you're quite right, of course, prayer and penance, but I think it's very important to look at the different messages of the different visions. I'll begin next week with a very brief dealing with Walsingham, as we're obviously in England, I think, although it's questionably a vision or apparition, but the message of Walsingham is a very good example of where it really helps, and I know Father John, who's now the rector of Walsingham, doing great work reviving the shrine there, is very keen, to help people to understand what exactly is Walsingham. What makes, we've got to ask in a sense, what makes this vision or this place specific? There's something very specific about Walsingham which makes it different from other places. Similarly with Lourdes, Fatima. In general, of course, the message is there, but there are different nuances and different emphases which I think it's very helpful to bring out. And I'll start by I'll hopefully get through most of the visions next week that the Church has approved, starting with Walsingham, Guadalupe, and then beginning with the so-called Marian era, which begins with Rue de Bac in 1830. Yes, and then we'll work our way through up to Our Lady of All Nations and Quibejo and one or two other less well-known places. Michael, yes, Michael first, then. Yeah.
I was going to say, one can see the things in as it were, the olden days, that it was something there. But do you think it's something now that we are so sophisticated that really we don't need this sort of thing because we have a sort of faith and we have this, everything is revealed through television and all the other things.
Mm.
In sort of the old time, it was something that would create a sense of people. Well, do we have that same sort of thing now?
That's a good question.
Into the faith.
Mm. I have to think about that. I'm not sure that I know the answer to that. I have I'm still, I think, technically supposed to be the national coordinator for Divine Mercy, so I go around giving talks at times on Divine Mercy, and I sometimes meet priests who say to me, oh, why do we need all this stuff about Divine Mercy? We've been telling people that God loves them for ages. Why do we've got to have these visions and things? And I always say to them, well, don't you think if the Church has approved this, and if God has actually revealed, if God has spoken to someone, do you not think we ought to listen to it? So in other words, I suppose I tend to approach it from the other way around, that we may think we're sophisticated, but if God has actually spoken, then perhaps we ought to have the humility to say we need to listen. Because in the end our faith is always something received. It's like, receiving Holy Communion. No one gives themselves Holy Communion. I mean, the priest does in a sense, but basically Holy Communion, the faith, is always something we receive from someone else rather than something we control. So I think we have to be prepared to receive it in the way that God wants to give it, which isn't always the way that we think. And perhaps in some ways I might turn your argument on its head and say the more sophisticated we become, the more we need a rather childlike approach. Not that we shouldn't be using our reason and our technological tools, but at the heart of our faith is a very simple, it's Christmas in a sense, isn't it? It's the
a bit like us saying you have to be a child.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's also a bit like, I suppose, you know all the time that your parents love you, well, I hope anyway for most people, but then you go on a holiday and spend the whole week with them. Quite nice occasionally, even as an adult, and that's how I experience Lourdes. I think it's amazing. Time out from screens and traffic and wild stuff, and it's fantastic. It's the best holiday, I can think of. It's just wonderful time out from all this sophistication.
You had another question.
I would like to know why the Church is hesitating in accepting Medjugorje.
That will be revealed the last 5 minutes. I don't know that I'm a great expert on that. I will come to this probably in the last session. I mean, how many of you have been to Medjugorje? Lots. How many people believe, or subject to the judgment of the church, that something supernatural is happening in Medjugorje? How many people definitely do believe that it isn't? You definitely believe that, yes. There are a couple of friends of mine are convinced that Medjugorje undermines Fatima. Is that your? No. Is that your understanding of it?
Well,
No.
I'm not sure about Fatima either.
You're not sure about Fatima either? Okay, right.
So, I put Lourdes of Guadalupe and Walsingham, yes.
Okay, good.
I've always thought that I've never been to Medjugorje, and I've heard
Mm.
so many positive things about it. One of the things that used to make me skeptical anyway, because somebody in my family used to get magazines regularly years ago, and all these messages, and I thought, I've never known Our Lady to be so sort of...
So loquacious, yes, yes.
You know,
Mm.
long messages every single time, that's what made me skeptical.
Yes.
I always thought it was very concise.
Yeah, I mean, those in favour of Medjugorje will point particularly to the fruits of Medjugorje. As I said, that is one of the main things we use to judge. And there's certainly very valid stories of conversions at Medjugorje. I've met one of the visionaries who appeared to me to be a very, very genuine person. On the other hand, there is, there's the whole question, would Our Lady speak at such length? There are questions raised. I mean, the Bishop of Mostar recently published some hesitations about his negative judgment on Medjugorje and pointed to various aspects of details. Once you get into this, it gets very difficult because he's saying, well, this happened, or they said this and this. There's all sorts of contradictions. Of course, there is this famous political dispute. That region has always been, or for many years, has been contested between the secular priests and bishop and the Franciscans. So I personally find it very difficult to make a judgment. Having been there myself and enjoyed it, I tend to view it positively, but I do understand some people's hesitations about it. Most of the apparitions that the Church has recognized, Our Lady tends to be quite brief. Maybe she has a reason for speaking at greater length, but we will see. Sorry?
They are very repetitive.
Yeah. Let's not get into a sort of a free-for-all on Medjugorje. Well, I'll try and deal with that a bit better at the last session. Yes.
So, I really enjoyed your talk tonight. I thought it was very logical, very sound, very clear. I was pleased to see John of the Cross there, because the Carmelite spirituality has really helped me, especially Teresa of Avila. Because I'll be very transparent. I was introduced to Fatima when I was probably 7 or 8 from my mum, who was well meaning. And I wasn't mature enough. I had an overactive imagination. I was too young and it scared me. And that fear lasted for a long time. And it's been a wound in my path that the Lord has been healing. And so that psychology of disposition to prayer, what I've noticed, and I'll try to be brief, is that a lot of people have used the rosary as a weapon of defence, rather than an invitation to a contemplative encounter with Jesus. And that's not a judgment, because there is a simplicity in that. But that was always my...
When you say a weapon, you mean a weapon against what, like to fight?
Well, in the sense that they've been told, if they pray this, they can mitigate this disaster, that this. And when I think to Jesus saying, do not be like the pagans, and go to the quiet room, don't need to use words.
Sure.
Equally, the fact of Scripture that prophecy, in the truest sense, was a prophet led you back to the truth and showed you a new way. And equally, Scripture interprets Scripture and all that. But equally, Jesus, our Lord, telling us that in the last days there will be plenty.
Yes, yes.
Equally, there will be a great falling away, and there will
Yes,
be
yes.
signs, wonders, but don't worry. St. Paul telling us an angel of light, or there will be signs and lying wonders in apocalypse, even fire down from heaven, as is quoted in the Elijah we think of. But I find that when we approach in prayer, I guess you peace and of healing.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. I think one of the things that happens with some apparitions. Well, to repeat first of all what I said, the fact that the Church says it's worthy of belief does not oblige anyone to believe it. If the Church says Jesus Christ is true God and true man, in order to be a Catholic, you have to really believe that. Sorry, you know, but you do not have to believe that Our Lady appeared at Fatima. All the Church says is it is worthy to be believed, because there are all sorts of human elements that get mixed up with apparitions, and as we know, before the Council there was quite a sort of Jansenistic, rigorous, over-strict spirit in the Church, which put many people in the fear of hell, and certainly for some people, I think things like Fatima, where the children actually say they were shown a vision of hell, can mingle with that, and for some people it can just be unacceptable. Something more specific actually occurred with this vision, which I'll need to go into when I talk about it, that the message that they gave was interpreted as a reference to, John will probably correct me here, Napoleon III, I think, and the bishop of the time was very in with Napoleon III, and so basically it was all suppressed, and poor Melanie, the girl there, in fact ended up in, where did she go? Darlington, Carmel she was put to for quite a while. She came to the northeast of England. Somehow it all got muddled up with French politics in a way that really kind of prevented the message from really taking off. Lourdes, yeah, not so much. Once Lourdes has been accepted, it's kind of very acceptable to most people. Guadalupe, as we'll see, is a message that has had a wonderful resonance and effect on South America, and really was very linked with the whole movement whereby indigenous Mexicans and therefore other South Americans were able to free themselves from seeing Catholic faith as being linked with Spanish conquistadores. So it works both ways. A message can be liberating, but for some people it can be associated with things such as you've mentioned, and therefore that's one of the reasons I think why the Church says basically you don't have to believe it. If it doesn't help you, put it to one side. And the Rosary, I think you're quite right. The Rosary as a weapon is a very interesting thing, which I wouldn't have thought a great deal of myself until I had the privilege a few weeks ago of meeting a bishop from Nigeria, northeastern Nigeria, Bishop Dome, who has had Boko Haram in his diocese, and the Church and everybody suffered enormously. And he's a man of deep prayer, and he was praying in his chapel one day, and he says, again, I believe him, but I no reason to doubt him. He says he had a vision while he was praying in front of the tabernacle, and he actually saw, it was not a kind of vision like of Bernadette had of Our Lady, but I suppose in the eyes of his mind, he saw Jesus in front of the tabernacle holding out to him a sword. And Jesus seemed to be saying, well, take this sword, to fight Boko Haram. And as Jesus came nearer and nearer in the vision, handed him the sword, and as he handed him the sword, it turned into a rosary. And he said, with this you will defeat, with this Boko Haram is gone. He said it through, Boko Haram is gone, is gone. And so he got all his people to say the rosary, and he says it's had a dramatic effect. He attributes a lot of the withdrawal of Boko Haram to people saying the rosary. So in that sense, I think the rosary is a weapon. Yeah, it is a weapon, but but even that metaphor could be misused by some people, or could become a negative image. It depends. So, in Catholic faith, in Catholic spirituality, the message basically is: you take what builds up your faith, you leave what is not helpful to you, at least for the time being. All these images, all these different messages, they're given for your benefit, not for the benefit of some institution or some visionary. If they're genuine, they're meant to help us, so we can take what is helpful and leave, at least for the time being, what is not.
And I think at that talk, because I was there, he alluded to the Battle of Lepanto,
Yep.
where the rosary was
Yes.
connected with winning the victory
Yeah.
to defeat the Turks,
Yeah.
who were almost overrunning Europe.
Yes.
So that's where
This has a great historical.
dominance
Yes. Yes.
from the 16th century.
Mm.
So it goes way back. It's
Yeah.
not just because of Fatima. It's,
Sure.
It's through the weapon
Mm.
of warfare.
I'm just wondering, what is the last date of one of the apparitions that the church has accepted so far?
I will come to that next week. I have to come back next week. But I think
That's fine. Next week is fine.
leave me to come to that next week. I might also give you. I'm just thinking that I might give you a false apparition. It's not. There's two different things here. There's the dates of an apparition, and there are sort of dates of acceptance. I was in France. Is Gleason gone? No. Mario. Where's Mario's? Mario, there you are. We were in France. When was it? 2 years ago now, or last year? I'm getting to get old and forget. 2 years ago, we went on a little pilgrimage. We went to La Salette, the Chartreuse, and then at La Salette we heard about Notre Dame de l'Eau, L-A-U-S, which is an apparition that occurred in the 1600s, but was only approved by the local bishop like 10 years ago or something. Most unusual, very, very little known place of vision, sort of about an hour and a half's drive south of La Salette. Lovely, beautiful place. So there are dates of apparitions and there are dates of approvals. So
The reason why I was asking that question is in terms of the things that people are saying now. Are people seeing more apparitions or less? Or
well, there's certainly lots and lots of reported apparitions, and you are free, in general, shall we say, to be guided by them if they build your faith up and help you. But you can't sort of take them as necessarily the last word or as being approved. But there certainly seem to be lots of people seeing or hearing things. That may be partly to do with the times we live in, or it may be that Our Lady is, as some people say, being very active because she knows we need her. But you have to exercise a certain caution in accepting what some of these, particularly if they're predicting specific events, that those are generally. I mean, I met her when I was in France in 2009. I met someone who was convinced by a French visionary who was receiving very clear messages from Jesus that France is shortly to have another king or queen. The monarchy will be restored in France. Look at all you French people. Well, you are free to believe that, but you're also free not to. Last question, I think, or two. 5 minutes, yes.
I believe there is another picture from La Salette with Our Lady sitting on a stone and she's crying. She's got.
Yes, I think, yes. I'll come to La Salette next week, yeah, I'll talk about that a bit more. It's quite an interesting one.
I receive a daily email called A Moment with Mary, and I don't know who signed me up for it, it just appeared.
Oh dear.
On the computer one day.
There's a little button probably saying unsubscribe somewhere.
Every morning. And there's a little, I think it comes from France, from a website called Marie de Nazareth.
Just the French,
And
yes.
every morning there's a short piece about some aspect of Mary, and all kinds of visions that I'd never heard about that happened in various parts of the world.
All right. Do you know this, Jean, Marie de Nazareth?
If you have a website.
Is it a good website? Or?
If anyone is interested.
Yeah, forward.
Our French expert says in general this is a good website.
Plenty of good texts.
Some good texts, yes, yes. I'm going to draw a close there, I think, and thank you all very much again. And I hope to see many of you next week. Thank you.